Boardroom revision to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Treaty 1 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. With me this morning is Ron Merritt, who's farthest to my left. Next to me is Lynn Nesbitt, and my name is Harvey Diamond. The city is represented by the assessor Matthew Barocas and later by Cam Wong. And our assistant right now is Ballon Nolan. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rules in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act of the Province of Manitoba. The matters for which revision have been requested are described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that applicants or assessors may make during this hearing must be sworn testimony, and when speaking to a matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparison of assessments of properties are not considered evidence by our board. Our board is appointed annually by council and superintendent of it and the city administration. We make our decisions on the basis of the evidence that we hear, and that alone, and we provide written orders that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that our decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to an application for exemption from taxation. And should a party wish to appeal, the information to do so will be included with our order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the matters to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the other applicants may have, and then the applicant may provide their testimony followed by questions. Each side will be given an opportunity to summarize if they wish to do so. Once the evidence on application is brought forward, the applicant may leave. The person will repeat for every matter on the agenda today, and the session will close after all applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You receive our orders by registered mail as soon as possible, and be advised that this information is being recorded and live streamed and forms part of our public record. We can swear in the parties. Thank you.
Please state your full name. And you swear to represent the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God? Thank you. Please state your full name.
Trevor Glenn Smith.
And you swear the evidence you represent is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the first matter that we're dealing with will be 442 William Avenue. Mr. Barocas, you can proceed whenever you're ready.
Rule number 13061218000442 William Avenue. Rule year 2020, April 1st, 2018. Reference date assessed $1,860,000. Originally built in 1905. It's got an effective year built of 1961. 30 suites. No indoor parking, says it has 12 outdoor parking spots. Construction class C, masonry bearing walls. Maybe good to just look at a picture of the place. If you skip to page 8 of my brief, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. It's an old building, obviously, built in 1905. It was a historically designated, I'm just reading off the website, normal school, which was originally constructed in the early 1900s. Restoration of this landmark was a major undertaking which has earned the project awards under the 1992 Heritage Preservation Award program. All suites within the building are designated for core need, thereby providing much needed assistance to households of modest income. It's got 29 units. Of the 29 units, 19 are one bedroom and 10 are two bedroom. Look at page 2, it hasn't sold. They have been good in returning the mailers, so that's not a problem. Page 3 shows the model breakdown. $699.09 on the rent with model parameters. Comes out to a net operating income of $98,571 with our model cap of 5.3. We get $1,860,000. If you go to page 4 of the brief, rental comps. So I tried to find comps that were in the area of similar suite composition. You'll see that the average monthly rent assigned to William is lower than the other comparables nearby. You look at the gross floor area per unit, we're up to 1,146. That would be misleading in regards to the overall size of the units. Now, I haven't inspected the place, but based on what the website describes, says there's rooms of varying sizes to accommodate games, celebrations, classes, exercise, small chapel that exists in a local rotunda in the building. So they've got, it seems, more common area that would push up the gross floor per unit figure, because it's just the gross floor per area. Everything's taken into consideration. Page 5, I looked at the CMHC rents as well in the area, this area, William, close to the borderline of Centennial and Midland. It is in Centennial. In fairness, there are some newer, more well renovated apartments in Centennial that would pull the rent up. For this reason, I also looked at the adjacent Midland, which has lower rents. So the weighted average on page 5 for Centennial is 901. And then when I looked at Midland, an area with less premium rents, loft style apartments, it's 707,000. So at 699, the model is giving it a lower valuation than what both of these are saying by a good amount on a weighted average basis. Page 6 is our cap rate designated by age and area, size. So for this area, it gets a 5.3 cap rate. This property was at the Board of Revision last time, and the Board of Revision elected to go with a 5.5 cap rate on it. So that's just a piece of reference. That is under appeal to the municipal board. It's not something that the appellant accepted or put forward. So page 9 is just a description of the place, kind of breakdown from the website, seniors-based and family-based housing co-op, award-winning renovated historic building. Now, I haven't had the opportunity to inspect the place, unfortunately. I don't have any interior pictures. Rent is geared to income. As such, the income and expenses weren't weight wasn't placed on them because we're not operating on a for-profit basis. So model was used. Given that we are low in regards to the rent, just weighed against CMHC average. Model expenses were used, and the model cap was pretty close to what the board decided on for 2018. Just in summation, I think the appellant and I are within $1,000 in terms of net operating income, so it's really a cap rate issue. Unless he has something else to bring forward, I don't know. So that's my evidence.
Thank you. Any questions to the assessor, Mr. Smith?
I do have a few, yes. So we're essentially in agreement on the rent applied to the building, is that correct?
Yeah.
So it's not a matter that it's low on the rent side. We coincide on that front. Is that accurate?
Yeah, between you and us, yeah.
Okay. The area that it's in would contribute to the rent being at the level that it is as well, correct?
Yeah, corner of William and Gertie.
Okay. And you had obviously mentioned that you haven't had a chance to inspect the
Not unfortunately.
property yet, so you haven't seen the interiors or size or
Just the pictures that
finish.
you have.
Fair enough. as we're in agreement, we don't need to discuss the rent comparables. We're pretty close in terms of net operating income. So let's address the capitalization rate. So you had mentioned that age and area are, I guess, the driving factors for the rents that, or rather the cap rate that's applied by the model.
That's correct.
Okay, so this property has a 5.3% cap rate applied, which I see is the 80th percentile, so it's falling within that narrow band of 20th to 80th percentile.
Mhm.
The year 1961, would that not typically, I'm not entirely familiar this cycle with where the breakpoints are with the city's model in terms of age. Typically there's a year after which the model cap rate changes.
Mhm.
Are you able to
Yeah, definitely.
let us know what that is?
So we've got different brackets. We've got market region, and then we also have the overall year built. We also have a size of the overall area as well. So for this one, in this market region, so we've got the groups, we have 1945 and earlier, we've got 46 to 59, we've got 60 to 74. You want me to start again?
Sure, sorry.
So we've got 45 and earlier, we've got 1946 to 1959, we've got 1960 to 1974, we've got 1975 to 1997, and then we've got 1998 and later. So-
Okay.
So this property, falling, we have an effective year build of 1961 on it. It falls into 1960 and 1974, over 15,000 square feet, we've got 5.3 on it. That's the same cap rate we have for 1946 to 1959. So it's not like it's just over the borderline, the lower group also has the same 5.3 cap rate model.
And you mentioned area as well, so being in the Centennial area would also drive the cap rate that the model produces, correct?
We don't have a premium for that area. We have a premium for North End, Market Region 4.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's driving a higher cap rate, it's driving the cap rate that the model has applied at 5.3%.
It falls into that bucket, yeah.
Right, so that again would take into account, Centennial takes into account, South Broadway, the Broadway through Portage Avenue North, the Exchange District, correct? So it would be any sales within that area would be what would be fed into the model, correct?
Same market region, yes.
Yes. So age-wise, the property was originally built in 1905 as a teacher's college with classrooms and gymnasium, etc. And was renovated later on. So the 1961 year seems a bit aggressive. Can you fill us in on how that is arrived at?
I wasn't around at the time the effective year was applied. It would have been decided by an assessor who evaluated it at the time of the renovations.
Okay. Those are all of my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Nesbitt?
Actually, no, I have no other questions.
And Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Baracus, you had, on your first page, you had said that there's 30 units in there, and on your worksheet, there's 29, so, but you...
It's 29.
So there's 29, so why would there be 30 in the front?
That would be something that the computer kicked out. I'm not
Okay.
sure why. It's not, I don't type this part out.
Okay. And you had mentioned that it's at the municipal board,
For 18.
and who took it to the municipal board?
Oh, the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I had some questions, but Mr. Smith went into quite a bit of detail and I already asked him and the
Okay.
answer, so thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Smith, you can go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. So as mentioned, the property was before the board of revision for 2018, and we did appeal the decision of the board to the municipal board, and of course, we're waiting for scheduling of that to occur at this point before we proceed with that appeal. Subject property itself, so as I mentioned, and you can get a good sense of it looking at the front cover of my brief there, this was one of 6 normal schools, they called them, in the province, I think, not just in the city. And the normal school was a teacher's college, so this is where the teachers were given instruction and earned their diplomas in order to teach. It was originally built in 1905, 1906, and it was largely classroom space and offices with a gymnasium, music room, all of the typical things that one would have in a school location. And then there was some residence, very minimal on the top floor, I believe, just for not for the students, but for staff itself that took care of the building, I believe it was. So not built out as multi-residential at that time. It went through a couple of iterations after that. I believe the Canadian military controlled the building for a considerable amount of time and put it to their use. And subsequently, it was sold on to a nonprofit organization that developed the property as a seniors low-income housing cooperative as it is today. So they took this turn of the century building essentially and converted it into multi-residential for low-income seniors residents. If you look at the photos of the interior of the building and the exterior, you can see the age of it, obviously. And then we have the photos of the interior. There's a common meeting room on page number 3 there, which I believe was probably the gymnasium at one point back in time. You can see the common area hallways. And then we get into the suites themselves. The finish level of the suites is very basic. It's always hard to convey this, but if you look at the tiling on the floor, it's of a very, very basic nature, hasn't been changed since they were renovated. The kitchens are, again, very utilitarian. There's nothing fancy or large about them. In fact, the units themselves are very small. Again, it's hard to show that in photos sometimes, but you can see the size of bedroom that we're looking at there, and just the general circulation space within the suites themselves. So very basic accommodation with basic finishes, and building having been built in 1905 originally. Obviously, we're not really looking at a structure of 1961. You still have the basic structure that was erected in 1905. There have been renovations done. Obviously, the demising into suites is new, and there's been some rewiring and plumbing and all of that to accommodate the new use of the building, but it's not a 1961 building. You have all of the issues that would go along with the building of that vintage in terms of the structure itself and any maintenance that would be required for it. So we can move on to the valuation. It's difficult to place an accurate rent on a space for this. In this case, we are in agreement with the city with regard to the rent level. If you look at how we've done it, we vary slightly, but very close in terms of the actual rent that we've applied to it. I think I'm $2,000 higher. The CMHC averages are certainly a good measure to look at. They give you the average for particular areas that CMHC has been able to gather from the marketplace. Centennial, falling within Centennial, as the city has mentioned, it really doesn't apply in terms of the averages. You can't take those and apply to it. Even Midland, I would say, would be a stretch for this particular location where the property is and what it is. If you look at the size of the units and the finish, the location of it, it would not be applicable. So we have applied the average rents from the Lord Selkirk area, and if you look at those averages, and again, Lord Selkirk is a lower end area overall, but it matches the subject location more closely than anything else that we're looking at. And if you look at the averages and how we've applied them, it actually comes out almost exactly the same as it does for the city. So I feel that's certainly a fair rental level. We've applied the same vacancy rate. Our expense allowance, if you look on page number 12, the actual expenses that were incurred for the property, exclusive of any expenses that should not be counted as property expenses, came to $187,327 at March 31, 2018. This was 78+% of the effective gross income. Obviously, we can't use that as a basis for coming up with an NOI in order to put a value on the building. It's simply too high. That is what it costs to run that building, but we can't value it on that basis. So we deferred to the city's expense ratio in this case, and that gives us the expense allowance of slightly over $138,000, giving us our final NOI of $99,613. From there, we can move on to the cap rate, the critical component. Valuing the property built in 1905 in the location that it is, converted from a former teachers' college into a low-income seniors housing cooperative at a 5.3% cap is simply not appropriate. It doesn't. It would never trade for that on the market in the location and the condition and the use that it currently is. If you were to buy this property, you would be acquiring it with those residents in place under the structure that they are. So you wouldn't have any immediate opportunity to dramatically change your return on that building by increasing rents, etc. It is what it is, and a 5.3% cap is well below what the market would value the property at. So looking at my page number 14, just very quickly, I'll run through this. The subject property is obviously social housing. There's no directly comparable sales of similar properties that have sold in the marketplace. Comparing them directly to standard market apartments and saying, well, they're one for one, it should be the same, exactly the same as a market apartment, is also not appropriate, as there's considerable restrictions and burdens that are not present on market apartments. These include rental income restrictions, rental market restrictions, smaller pool of tenants, obviously additional operating expenses, as I had shown in my brief. The expenses are higher than what we've applied. Physical condition, we have a building from 1905 that has been renovated And finally, disposition restrictions which you would face. Again, you have a property that has residents in place under a certain structure that would continue going forward. So if you're requiring that, obviously there's issues with regard to picking up a property such as that in comparison to a standard market apartment. Briefly, there's an appraiser out of the United States, Mr. Richard Poulton. He's an accredited appraiser out of the US, kind of an expert in his field, that being seniors and affordable housing. He's written a book entitled Valuation and Market Studies for Affordable Housing, in which he states, developing a market-derived cap rate for an income-restricted property begins with an analysis of the available rates for similar unrestricted properties. Then these rates are adjusted based on the risk factors that an investor would consider in developing a cap rate. The result is a cap rate based on market factors and associated risks. In the final analysis, property tax assessment must take into account the public purpose of the project, overall benefits and burdens, and the restricted nature of the operating rents. The general investment grade cap rate range that we've seen in our company typically runs between 5 and 6% over the subject time frame. Now that's investment grade properties. We do see properties that fall outside of that range, both on the high end and a few on the low end where they're being purchased for repositioning, etc. But that is the general range. 5 to 6% is what we're seeing in the subject time frame. If you look at my page number 15, we have a little bit more information with regard to valuation of seniors housing. This is taken from the Canadian Property Valuation magazine. It's an article titled Valuation of Seniors Housing. The graph that's presented there simply is showing comparison in cap rates between standard market apartments, that being the darker green line at the bottom, and various levels of seniors housing, those being the two lines above that. Now, the important thing is not what the cap rate is that's being illustrated there. It's Canada as a whole, and it's higher levels of care, etc. But what we're seeing is the gulf between seniors housing cap rates that are being applied in the marketplace versus standard market apartments. So that's where you see the gulf, and the higher cap rates being applied to straight seniors housing. Looking at market comparables, the large commercial brokerages, we looked at both 2016 and 2018. We're really seeing no change in capitalization rate between those 2 years. Colliers for low rises is showing 5.25% to 6% in 2016, 5 to 6% in 2018. Again, these are from the brokerages. They're not directly related to all sales that have occurred. It's their impression of what the marketplace is paying for properties in the relevant time frame. Looking at C.B. Richard Ellis on page number 17, we have a number of things here. Looking at the apartment stats, you can see low rises in 2016 running from 5.5% up to 6% for low rise A and B. 5.5 being the bottom end. Then for 2018 in the lower left-hand corner, we again have 5.5% to 6%. Fairly narrow band for, again, investment-grade properties. Subject property is not an investment-grade property, nor would it be viewed as such by purchasers on the marketplace. Bottom right-hand corner of that page, you can essentially see the flat line of capitalization rates as presented by C.B. Richard Ellis for apartment cap rates. We're really seeing no change over the last number of years there. So how do we determine the cap rate for the subject? Well, certainly it would be at the high end of that range and above, given the issues that I've stated. We have property built in 1905 and converted to its current use. We have very small rental units, very basic finishes. The location that it is in is certainly not optimal and wouldn't draw a lot of interest on the marketplace. It's a property that falls outside the norm and certainly any astute investor would apply a premium to the cap rate in purchasing a property such as this. So we've used a 6.5% cap rate, and looking at our final value, that brings us to $1,533,000 in market value. The addendum materials include the income and expense submitted, as well as the information referred to in the brief as well. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Smith. Mr. Barakas, any questions of Mr. Smith?
Yeah. So, looking at the pictures, it's hard to tell because there's a lot of stuff. So it looks like, though modest, that kitchen's been redone?
No. That would be original to the renovation.
Oh, original to the renovation.
Yeah, there was no kitchens prior because it wasn't a multifamily.
So the bathroom, there's no picture of the bathroom, would that be a similar?
It would be of a similar style and vintage. Really, there hasn't been any renovation to the property, to my knowledge. You can see the flooring at the top of page 5. That's pretty much the flooring throughout, unless it's the kind of industrial grade carpet that you would see at the top of page 4 there.
The windows been redone?
I do not recall if they have redone all of the windows. I think some of them have been, but I can't recall.
Any structural issues with the property?
There have been issues over time, yeah.
So I was taking a peek ahead to the addenda. I guess if you go to the last page and you go back 1, 2, you have what it shows the vacancy and the capital cost. So it looks like under here for at least 2000, the most recent year leading up to March 2018, they spent some money that they've assigned to capital costs. So is this an indication of the level of regular investment in keeping the place in operating condition outside of regular maintenance?
It would vary considerably, obviously, depending on the year and what needs to be done. They don't. There's been very little money invested in renovating the units themselves over time. It's been more focused on other issues that have cropped up. So no, I wouldn't say that. Taking a 1-year sample would be representative of what they typically spend on the property.
Okay. So, also I noticed on the, going back 1 page from that one, there's no vacancy with the property, right?
Again, we're looking at a 1-year sample here, and then in looking at placing a market value on it and arriving at a fair market value, one has to take into account the longer time horizon and apply a vacancy, as the city does and we do as well.
I just, like you mentioned, like it's the cap rate being affected by it being like a senior's house. I mean, it would come with the crowd there, so to speak, but it would also come with the crowd's level of vacancy, right? The type of tenant there, you'd say that it would stay if someone bought it, correct?
They would indeed, yes. Now, and I don't believe I presented the seniors vacancy study, but typically it is somewhat higher because of turnover, because of, say, care issues where people need to move on, or obviously other health issues arise, et cetera. So certainly a 3% vacancy is not out of line with what would be experienced in the market.
Is there a waiting list to get in?
I couldn't tell you. I know that that's a common refrain, and I think if you ask the question of are there waiting lists for many apartments, certainly people apply to lots of places. My dad is 84 now, and we're applying to about 5 different places for him. Doesn't mean we're going there.
And Richard Poulton, is this a Canadian study or is this from another country?
It's an American study, and Mr. Richard Poulton is accredited by the American equivalent of the Appraisal Institute of Canada. MAI is their designation, which is equivalent to our AACI designation, which is the highest appraisal designation you can achieve in Canada. You can, as an AACI, write an exam in order to get your equivalent MEI designation in the States, but they're certainly equivalent.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Is this any questions of Mrs. Smith?
I do. When were the renovations substantially done?
They were done in 1992.
1992, and you question the 1961 effective age. What do you feel the effective age would be as a result of
Well,
those renovations?
effective age is an interesting thing because you're placing an overall age on the building, right? So you have your renovations of conversion into the units, but your structure is still from 1905, and the shifting and insulation and whatever's in the walls is of that vintage, right? There are issues that go along with buildings of those age, so I would hesitate to place a date on it. It's more how that vintage would affect the overall value of the building.
And in addition to the interior renovations to convert it to a residential type of property, were there any structural or renovations to the structure itself?
They would have, they had to do the demising, obviously, into the individual units, and wiring, plumbing, et cetera, for the units, because it would be present in its current state. So in that effect, it was, yes.
And the city has discussed how its cap rate can be broken into age ranges.
Mhm.
Does Stevenson do the same thing, or in your analysis? To
Uh,
arrive at that 6.5, like, you've cited several factors, but can it be broken down further?
It's, yes, I can certainly address that. We don't do it in the manner that the rigid manner that the city does, in which you have 1945 to 1959, or whatever the divisions are, and located in this area gives it a 5.3. We collect the data from the marketplace as far as the sales that occur, look at the true cap rates that are produced from that. We don't apply any additional vacancy beyond what's there. We don't adjust their expenses, et cetera. The cap rates that are produced are what was paid for, or what was the basis on which it was bought is what the cap rates produced actually are. So we look at the information we gather as a whole, and use our professional judgment in arriving at the cap rates. And of course, that is looking at the age, location, condition, et cetera, stability of the income stream, condition of the property, et cetera, et cetera.
So what types of properties went into your cap rate? just the broad pool of all apartments, multifamily in the city?
That's
and
correct.
Look at it that way?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
And I don't either. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We're going to call a short recess right now. And when we're reconvening, I can just advise that our assistant has been changed from Balhan Rojo to Katie Sutherland, and the city's assessment department is now represented by Cam Wan. So we proceed to the next matter, which is 861 Broadway, and we can swear all the parties in. Thank you.
Yeah. State your full name.
Ken Wong?
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
State your full name.
Jared Story?
Do you swear that the evidence you're about to present is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, Mr. Wong, when you're ready, you can proceed.
Sure. Regarding the
And we're dealing with 861 Broadway. Is the first matter on the agenda since the one.
661. That's 661? Yeah.
Or 661, I'm sorry, yeah, I should put my glasses on, shouldn't I? I usually don't need them, but I did make a mistake there. So it is 661.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So in this case, we requested income and expense information and it wasn't submitted, so we're seeking non-compliance for this property.
Okay. Can I go through the details of what was submitted and,
Sure. For the 2017 mailer, we submitted a request for information in 2018. We didn't receive a response, so we sent up a follow-up certified letter to request the information, and there was no response from that either. On page 8 and 9 is a copy of the certified mailer.
so that completes anything you want to say with regard to this matter?
Yes.
Okay. Any questions?
No, we are not disputing the non-compliance. It was an oversight on behalf of the owner. So the assessor is correct. The forms were not submitted, so we're not contesting the non-compliance.
Okay, so it's not been contested, but I think I just would like to discuss this with the other board members before we make a decision anyway.
Sure.
So perhaps the two of you just step up for 1 second.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, probably predictably, we have agreed that the city's application for non-cooperation will go forward,
Okay.
and we're granting it, and you can proceed, Mr. Story.
Okay, thank you very much. So the subject property is located at 661 Broadway, roll number 12090707000. The effective age of the building is 1911. It's 2.5 stories, and it has 4 bachelor suites, 5 one-bedrooms, and 1 two-bedroom. So again, we're at the northeast corner of the intersection of Broadway and Furby. According to the City of Winnipeg Property and Taxation Department, the site size is 10,585 square feet. It is zoned C2 commercial. The current city assessment is $339,000, and we're here today to request an assessment of $170,000. We've come to this number because we are disputing the assessor's capitalization rate of 6.1 according to our Altus cap rate study, which we've provided to you. We believe that a cap rate of 6.6 is most appropriate. And I've also included our financial statements as well as a stabilized workup of a typical year's income. If you follow me to page 6 of my brief, please. Go through this very quickly. So what we've done to come to a stabilized NOI for this property for a typical year. So we've taken an average, in most cases, the average of 3 years, and in years where there were atypical expenses, for example, a major repair or something of that nature, we've taken a longer range average. So the assessor believes that the potential market gross rents for this asset is $55,054, and we've included the evidence to show that it's actually $43,425. The actual vacancy of an asset of this class, of this vintage, in this area is 13.8, and that's how this is performing, giving us an effective gross rent of $37,435. Now, this is slightly atypical when we are stabilizing, but if we go down to our total expenses, you'll see that the expenses are actually outpacing the EGI. So there, we get an expense ratio of 128.5%. Now, because that's atypical, we use the maximum ratio that we permit based on parameters, which is 70%. So as opposed to applying the actual expenses of $48,102, this is now in, sorry, lines 31 through 30, well, 31, 32. We're using $26,204. So effectively, when the expense ratio outpaces 70%, we stabilize it at that market parameter, which brings us to an NOI of $11,230, capitalized at our 6.6%, giving us an indicated market value of $170,159, rounded to $170,000. That's our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, any questions of the applicant?
So basically, you couldn't use any of their expenses.
Their expenses are higher than, the expenses are high, and it's largely based on the fact that this is a converted home. It was actually built as one of the first orthopedic clinics in the city of Winnipeg. It's on the commemorative list, it's not historic, so they're not able to avail themselves of any grants, but it is seen as a towel court, if you're a local history buff. It was converted to a home in the 1930s, and it's been demised in such a way that the repairs and maintenance are extremely high. So again, when the ratio goes that high, we have to stabilize it at the top end of our parameters, which is 70%. So that's what we've done here.
I was just wondering, how can the property owner sustain, losses of $15,000 every year?
Well, they've owned this property for a number of years. I don't know what their plans are in the future, but I know that it's a legacy property. It's one that was owned by family members and has been passed down. That's as much as I know, but in terms of, we can certainly see how the way that it's performing is not, it's not generating income. It would be operating at a loss at this point.
Do you have anything that might support like a 70% expenses for property?
The fact that they're 128%, the actuals are 128%, using 70, that's the as far as we'll go. That's the top end of what we'll use, and it's clearly appropriate here when the actuals are 128%.
That would be all my questions.
Thank you. Has there been any questions of the applicant?
Yes, you arrive at a cap rate of 6.6%, but you didn't go into any explanation of how that was arrived at.
Absolutely.
Could you go through your study?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, if we, to my study. So, we went through the apartment universe, so to speak, and looked at all of the sales within the relevant reference period. Turn to my page 3 of the Altus cap rate study, please. Our cap rate study is derived from the sale of these properties. And you'll see that these cap rates within the relevant period range from 5.13 to a high end of about 6.65. Now, these are different locations, they have different sizes, different vintage. So in order to come to our cap rate for our subject at 661 Broadway, I've determined that our most comparable sale in the cap rate study is 512 Balmoral. 512 Balmoral transacted at a 6.65 cap rate, and I think it's fair to say that it's superior to the subject. 512 Balmoral has 28 units with 10 parking stalls and was built in 1972. I believe that the location would generally be considered comparable, though Balmoral may have a slight edge based on the fact that it's approximately 400 meters from the University of Winnipeg, which may make it slightly superior. So in terms of how we came to our cap rate, we took the most comparable from our cap rate study and applied that rate. So that's how we arrived at a 6.6 cap for this property.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, any questions?
Yes, I noticed the vacancy rate in 2015 was, close to 14%.
Correct.
So, but it was zero in the next couple of years. So
Okay.
what happened there?
Let me just pull it. Well, I mean, we only have 10 units, so a 13% vacancy rate is not huge when you're dealing with 10 units. So I suppose they were leased up, and now keep in mind that vacancy. No, the vacancy is actually steady, but they've used vacancy percent of market rent. So that 13.8% is likely would carry through. So it's probably stayed around 10 or 13%. My understanding from a 10-unit asset would be that there's usually one unit that's vacant at any given time. There's also a huge amount of turnover in this building, which speaks to the high level of repairs and maintenance. Every time somebody moves in or out, there's maintenance that has to be done to prep the suite for the new tenant. So it is a place where there's a higher than average amount of turnover.
So in your evaluation of the subject property,
Yes.
how do you deal with a negative cash flow?
Well, that's the challenge when we're stabilizing. So again, we would say that it's not typical in the market to have a negative cash flow.
No.
So we'll take 70% as the top end of the expense ratio. And
Well, that's just an
apply-
arbitrary figure anyways.
Correct, that's
Yeah.
correct. But we're looking at how a prudent purchaser at the reference date may look at this asset and say, well, perhaps we could operate at in the best case scenario, a 70% expense ratio.
So in your evaluation, if you have a negative cash flow, would you look at valuing the property of land only?
Yes, and I believe.
And did you look at that?
We have, and actually the land only value is very close to the value that we come to on the income approach.
So you didn't,
I didn't go terribly
Yeah.
deeply into the land only, because land only, the issue that we've had is
Yeah.
that.
it's not a big lot anyways.
No, it's not, there's not a demolition permit in order or anything like that, so I wasn't going to ask for land only, but the land only value would support the income value based on these parameters.
Was this property appealed before?
It's been appealed
Many times?
many times.
Okay, and what is the status? Is it at the municipal board or anything like that?
No,
or-
my understanding is that the assessor and our firm have come to terms on it by way of agreement, which is not,
Okay.
I can't submit here, but, yeah, that's all I can say about that. Yeah, we've certainly come to terms on it in the past.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, my questions were pretty similar to where Mr. Rivera was going. land value, but I think that basically, when you have a negative cash flow, you can't really evaluate on an income approach because there isn't an income, so you have to look at other ways of doing so.
Fair enough.
The building might have some use to it as another, possibly as another use, and I guess the best use would be something that would have to be looked at. I think that maybe, no investor is gonna buy this and say, well, I'm gonna knock off the expense and keep it at 70%, because that figure is not gonna produce income for them.
Right,
So based on, if somebody's buying it for income approach, that's not gonna cut it, obviously.
Right, but they may change the use somehow, they may look at it.
Absolutely,
as the best
and
use.
have you looked at other usage and what the best use might be that might lend itself to a higher valuation of the property?
We have not been engaged to perform a highest and best use analysis on this property, no. That would be a fairly in-depth exercise from our perspective, so.
With a location, it might be more valuable as a parking lot, for example.
Sure, there's all kinds of issues that come around that with zoning variances, permits, so it's not just as simple as saying.
Yeah, although it's
scrape
not
it.
producing income anyway.
Right, yep. And that's,
Now, you took an arbitrary value of 70%, but why wouldn't it be 60% or 50% of the
because
expenses?
70% is the top end that we use based on precedence.
So it's the best one for your vantage point, but why
Well,
wouldn't you
it's-
use a better one, like 60 or 50?
Because 128% is extremely high, so that would call for the top end of our range.
Yeah, but that doesn't really help because you're looking at the expenses, and if that property has another valuation, it's still worth something, no matter what it is, where it exists.
Correct.
And so just taking the arbitrary amount of 70% might not
Well,
value
it's-
the property
It's
fairly.
not completely arbitrary, because if the expense ratio is say 73%, then we may use 65% or something like that. We may try and stabilize it,
Okay.
downward adjust it that way. But when the actuals are 128%, it's wholly appropriate to use the top end of our range.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's our questions. You can proceed with the session's evidence, Mr. Minogue.
The subject property is 661 Broadway. The property description is on my first page, which the applicant has already gone through. So on our page 2, there's a sales history of the property where it sold in 2009 for $311,000. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $458 to get a potential income of $55,000. We use a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $53,000. And we use a 61% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $20,000. Capped at 6.1%, we have an estimated market value of $339,000. So it works out to $34,000 per unit. On page 4 are rent comparables, showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market, or showing that the rents we've used are actually, the market is higher than what we've used for this property. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates, and showing our cap rates are similar to what our organizations say. Page 6 are relevant excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act. On page 7 are some pictures of the subject property. And we skip to the last page. The subject property does generate a negative cash flow. But to give you an idea of what something might sell for in the area, it says 264 Langside and it sold for $224,000. It's 1,900 square feet. The subject property is 7,196 square feet. I'm not saying that they're exactly comparable, but this is what something might sell for in the area. using that as a bit of a comparable. It supports the approach that we used. And so, you know, using the comparable and the parameters that we've used are, I say it's representative of the market. The rents are supported by the market, and 61% expenses that we've used are on the higher end of the range for properties. So I think it's reasonable, and so the parameters that we've used are reasonable, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $339,000.
Thank you. Questions, Mr. Story?
Yes, thank you. Okay. Well, first off, if we go to the assessor's first page, the actual year built is 1903 and the effective year is 1911. Can you tell me what gave rise to that adjustment in the effective year?
I can tell you why, but usually we put effective years in place
Oh, I know,
to
I'm wondering,
represent.
do you know anything about this, anything that's gone on with this property in terms of improving it from its original state in 1903?
No,
Okay. Have you visited the property?
I've not.
Okay. Have you visited your comparables?
I've not.
Okay. Did you put this list together of the comparables, or was that generated by the algorithm or by a machine of some sort? Did you select these yourself?
Yes.
Okay. In terms of the sales history on page 2, are those arm's length sales?
I'm not sure.
What about one for $1? Do you consider that an arm's length sale?
I'm not sure what was involved with that sale.
Okay. So I'm interested in your page 5. So, page 5, is this the assessment department's cap rate study this is all that's available for the taxpayers to see, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So can you tell us how many sales were used to develop the study?
No.
Can you give us a median age of the properties that were entered into the study?
No.
Can you tell us the ratio of high-rise versus low-rise buildings that were entered into the study?
No.
Can you tell us the mix of Class C versus Class D construction properties that were entered into the study?
No.
Okay, are your cap rates calculated including closing costs?
I don't know.
Okay, how about legal fees?
I don't know.
Okay, so am I correct in assuming that this table is all the assessment department is willing to produce with regards to the cap rates for this cycle?
For today, yes.
For today, okay. Okay. Now, you'd mentioned that your cap rate study is in line with other players in the market, third parties like Colliers, CBRE, Cushman, and Wakefield. You're aware that those third parties look at investment grade sales, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Would you consider this asset an investment grade property?
I would say no, but I don't have that type of experience.
But you did admit that it's producing a negative cash flow, correct?
Yes.
So theoretically, that would, or by all logical standards, that would not be an investment grade property for most investors.
Like I
in the
said,
market.
I would say no, but
Okay.
the thing is, I'm not experienced with that.
Fair enough. Okay. Now, you've included our income and expense questionnaires for the due date of April 2016. Just always interested in this. Do you think that these numbers support the city's position or the owner's position?
believe it supports the city's position.
But it's showing that the city is using modeled rents, modeled vacancies, modeled cap rates. These are the actuals. And we have a duty here. The exercise is to perform a site-specific analysis on each asset, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ask you again, do you suppose then, with these income and expense forms that show that the asset is losing money, the inclusion of these forms, would you not agree that they tend to support the owner's position versus the city's position?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Because when numbers don't represent what the market is selling for, you go to the market to try to get information to establish a market value. So I'm just saying that, you know, with the information that is presented here, you actually can't derive a market value from the information. So that's why it supports the city position
Well, we're
to
doing
try to go to the market to get market information to try to establish a market
Right, I
value.
think I
So
see what you're
that's why I say that.
But when we look at a site-specific analysis of an asset and its history of vacancy, what it's producing, what the cap rate might be, and we look at these numbers.
You know, and we hear that.
Got it, okay.
And no matter what,
Yep, let's not spin our wheels on
that's
it.
your argument,
Fair enough.
basically, and, you know,
Yeah.
no matter what Mr. Wong says,
Fair.
we either accept your argument or not.
Okay, now finally on page 19 of your brief, you've included a sale from September of 2017 of 264 Langside. Is this a single-family home?
Yes.
May I ask why we're comparing a single-family home to a multi-residential building? This is not the same asset class, is it?
This is a single family home.
Okay, so it's not the same asset class. Okay, that's all I just wanted to point that out. Okay, those are my questions, thank you.
Thank you. Is this any questions to the assessor?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, my actually only question is, I'm looking at the photograph that you have of the premises on page 7 of your brief. And it shows basically what looks like a single-family home from the outside.
Yes.
I suppose it was at one time maybe a single-family home? Do you know?
I actually think Mr. Story has a,
Single-family home.
Yeah, it was originally. And are any, do you know if properties like this in this area are being reconverted back to that at this time?
not to my knowledge.
Not to your knowledge?
No.
You don't know of any conversions of?
No, I mean, I think normally it's going the other way,
Mhm.
like they're converting to multifamily
Okay.
whenever possible.
Okay, so your comparison of a single-family dwelling then with this property, if this can't be converted back, then doesn't really
Oh,
help us.
I'm not saying it can't be converted
Well,
back.
won't be, it
Yeah.
will likely be.
Yeah,
In other words, what I'm saying is, if it was likely to be purchased by somebody
yeah,
and converted to a single-family dwelling,
yeah.
maybe it could be evaluated as such, but if it's not likely to be done so, then that doesn't assist us very much in coming to a value.
I guess the reason that I put it in there is to give you an idea of what a building might sell for. And even though it is a single-family property, basically the properties typically don't sell for,
And I hear that, but somebody who's buying it, if it's gonna be an investment property, looks at it as an investment for them, and they'll pay based on what they can return on it.
yeah,
If somebody's buying it to live in themselves, they don't look at it as an investment, they look at it as a place to live in,
yeah.
and it has other dimensions of valuation. If this property is unlikely to be converted back, then I don't think that's a fair determination of seeing what a single-family dwelling in the area would sell for.
Yes, I understand. I guess my reason for putting in there is just to give you an idea of what a building might sell
Right.
for, and maybe not, even though it is a single-family property. That's,
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll have to consider this one and figure it out. So our next property after this one then will be 110 Young Street. And Mr. Wong, you can proceed when you're ready.
the subject property is 110 Young. The roll number is 120-909-68000. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It was built in 1914, but we have an effective year built in 1960. There are 20 suites with 1 outdoor parking stall. On page 2 is the sales history of the subject property. Most recent sale in 2007 for $725,000. Page 3 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $782 to get a potential income of $215,000. Used a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $210,000. And we used a 49% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $106,000. At 5.3%, we have an estimated market value of $2 million. $86,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents we used are in line with what's on the market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. Page 7 and 8 are some pictures of the subject property. On page 9, 216 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Their operating income for 2017 is $67,000. For 2016, it's $104,000, and for 2015 is $112,000. That is in line with the operating income that the model is estimated at $106,000. So seeing as like the actual performance of the property supports the model, I ask that you maintain the assessment at $2 million.
Thank you. Mr. Story, questions of the assessor, thank you.
110 Yonge Street. Okay, well, suppose my first thing that jumps out to me, now you can confirm there's 1 parking stall in this entire building, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay. Page 4, when we look at the rent comps, this just was something that was interesting to me. Comp number 2, are you familiar with that building at 644 Portage Avenue?
I've driven by it a few times.
You're aware that's the Casa Loma? It's a historic museum.
If it's a name, if it has a name to it, I'm not sure of it.
Well, it's interesting because it's, the rents in there are reasonably high compared to what we're looking at. So, which of these comps would you say is your best comp, or most comparable to our subject?
I'm not sure. I would just say that they're all reasonably comparable in the sense that they have similar effective ages. And
Are you aware that 100 Yonge is owned by the same owner? Almost
No.
identical? Are you aware of
I
that?
don't know.
Okay. What's interesting is if we go to the average monthly rent in 100 Yonge, it's $150-ish lower than our subject, when they're almost exactly the same. You can go through the
well,
the
I
parameters
mean,
of them. They're almost-
there's a
they're
lot
twin
more
buildings.
two bedrooms in the subject than the 100 Young.
Sure, but they're owned by the exact same owner. It would be illogical for him to ask for 630 in one, and the building next door he asks for 785. That doesn't make sense.
Well, to
Just
ask
wanted to
for a
point that
different
out.
rent for a 1 bedroom and a 2 bedroom.
Right,
It would be
okay.
different.
So the cap rates, again, I'll ask you, this is just to not be a broken record, but this is all that the assessment department is willing to provide to the taxpayers. You will not show any inputs, you will not show how these rates were derived. You will lean on third-party studies that only include investment-grade properties. Is that correct?
We're not leaning on the third grade organizations for anything. Our cap rates are derived from the income and expense information that we get from property owners and from the sales that occur within the city.
Fair
So that's what our cap rate is based on.
But you can't tell us how many inputs
No.
were entered into the study, the makeup of the asset types, the
No.
vintages, the construction classes, the areas of town, if there's if there are cap rate adjustments for, say, the north end or the west end or areas like that, you won't tell us anything about that?
There are different cap rates for different parts of the cities for different.
Okay, and do we adjust for West Broadway?
There are different cap rates, say in there less, in the areas that are by the railroad,
Right.
near Isabel, their cap rates would be a little bit higher, or depending on the age of the building, it would be a little bit lower or higher.
But none of this is made known to the taxpayer.
I'm not sure about what information is available.
From what I can tell, the only thing that's available to the taxpayer right now is this table, is that correct?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there is more information available on our website.
There's not.
Like with regards to, so I think what's available is, we have a document that shows how we value income producing properties. That's available. I'm actually not sure of what is included in that document. It doesn't, I haven't looked at it in a little while from the internet. So I'm not sure if it includes that type of information, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough. And again, I'll ask for each one of these. When you include the income and expense forms that we submit, that we use, or that our firm uses to develop the stabilized income, do you believe that that supports the city's position or the owner's position, based on a site-specific analysis of the asset and how it performs within the reference state?
I believe it supports the city's position.
Okay, fair enough. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Any questions of the assessor?
No.
Mr. Leonard?
No, Mr. Chairman? Thank you.
Okay. And I don't have any either, so Mr. Story?
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, 110 Young
What's
Street.
yours?
So, again, effective date is 1960, 3.5-story building in the West Broadway area. 15 one-bedroom apartments, 8 two-bedroom apartments, which we would consider perhaps an unideal suite mix in this market. The city of Winnipeg is assessing the asset at $2 million even, and we are requesting an amended assessment of $1,874,000. The site size, according to the City of Winnipeg Property and Taxation Department records, is 6,448 square feet, and it's zoned residential 2, and again, 23 units, 15 one-bedrooms, 8 two-bedrooms, and 1 parking stall. So, we are disputing the assessor's capitalization rate of 5.3%, and we are instead applying a capitalization rate of 5.75%, based on the Altus cap study that we've provided. Now, if you don't mind, let's go to our cap study. Again, that's page 3. As we've said, we've entered a variety of different sales to develop an understanding of how the market is responding to the multifamily universe within the relevant dates. And for 110 Young, we have deduced that the most comparable asset is 277 Langside, which transacted at a 6.29 cap rate. 110 Young would certainly be considered similar in terms of location, but perhaps inferior in terms of interior finish, but probably comparable. So 6.29 is reasonable. We've applied 5.3. 110 Young is, sorry, one moment. 110 Young, the vintage is, it's 1960, but it may be slightly, I misspoke. 110 Young would have a higher quality of interior finish than 277 Langside, but would be considered reasonably comparable in terms of location. Okay, so when we take our 5.75 cap rate and apply it to the income approach, if you come with me to page 6 of our brief, the potential gross market rent that the city is using is $215,849, which is of course derived through modeling, where we've used actuals over the last 3 years, and we've come to a stabilized market gross rent of $233,365. Typical vacancy in this subject is 4.6%. The assessors used the model vacancy of 2.6%, which brings us to an effective gross rent of $222,630. There's some extra income that comes by way of laundry. We've used the 2017 number because that's what we would call the new normal. We've typically been generating about $1,500-ish per year in terms of laundry, but 2017 was the most typical year, so we've applied that number. Summed with our EGI, with our effective gross rent, we come to an EGI of $224,645. You can see we've added all of our expenses. Now, in some cases, again, we've used the most typical year, which is 2017, and then in other cases, we've used an average of multiple years. Now, I'll draw your attention to line 27. There were significant repairs in 2017, so we've used an average of 2013 to 17 to come to a stabilized repair and maintenance line item of $39,102, which gives us a expense ratio of 52%, which is fairly close to the modeled ratio of 49.6. Our NOI, based on actual stabilized financials, is $107,745, in opposition to the assessment department's $106,023. And when capitalized with our 5.75%, we come to an indicated 2020 market value of $1,873,825. So again, we ask that be rounded to $1,874,000 for this assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of the applicant, Mr. Erdogan?
No question.
Ms. Nisbet, any questions?
No question.
Mr. Nerd?
Mr. Story, how nice is the area?
How nice is the area? West Broadway? Well, I would say that it has its issues. I've done a number of apartments out there, and I've done site inspections on every single one of these apartments, and I think we all know what's been.
Graffiti on the building?
Pardon me?
Graffiti on the building?
Certainly on surrounding buildings. I'm not sure about that. I don't know that this one has graffiti on it, but the surrounding, the detritus and the sort of the things that are left behind in the back alley are concerning. Yes.
Okay. You said you inspected them? Or
Not
drove past them?
interiors. Well, I walked around them. Yeah.
Okay. The entrance to the building, lock system on there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
You'd have to, yeah.
Okay. I thank you.
Okay. So basically, Mr. Story, this is obviously, your NOI is a little bit higher than the city's when you.
When we use actuals, correct?
Yeah, when you use actuals. So it's a cap rate
This is a
issue
cap
as far as
rate.
you're concerned.
Absolutely, and we believe that 5.3 is too low.
And when you questioned Mr. Wong, I don't know why you did it, because it is cap rate, but you indicated you thought that the best comparable of his was the one owned next door at 100 Yonge.
Absolutely.
And maybe this is not really pertinent because we're talking with cap rate anyway. But the fact of the matter is that the building next door has 8 bachelor suites, which you get lower rent on.
Sure.
And it has no 2-bedroom, whereas the subject property has all 1-bedroom, 2-bedrooms, so you get higher rents per suite.
Sure.
But we're not going to do that anyway, because your NOI is basically the same or a little higher.
Correct, so if it's the same owner,
Yeah.
and they believe that they could achieve a higher rent by redemising or something of that nature, if they could, they would.
They would. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Yes.
So the next matter we have is 241 Yonge. And when you're ready, Mr. Wong.
The subject property is 241 Yonge. Roll number is 120-910-801-00. It's a residential apartment block that's 2 stories high. It was built in 1960, and has 14 suites with 7 outdoor parking stalls. On page 2 is a sales history of the subject property. On page 3 is our income valuation summary. We use average rents of $570 to get a potential income of $95,000. We use the 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $93,000. We use that 53% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $43,000. Capped at 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $845,000, which is $60,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables, showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 7 are some pictures of the subject property. Their income for 2017 was approximately $87,000. It's a little bit lower than what the model is estimated at $95,000. It appears that the model is a little bit high in estimating the income for the property. In this particular case, I wouldn't pose a valuation of $684,000 or so.
And that's based on what their NOI?
Yeah, I would.
City's cap rate?
Yeah, it would be based off of an adjusted NOI, which would be approximately $34,909 at our 5.1 cap rate.
Sorry, what was that value?
$684,000, I think it was.
684?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mr. Wong, your NOI would be what again?
34,909.
So I think it's a recommendation, Mr. Story, you can accept that.
Thank you very much, but I think we'd like to
Well,
proceed.
I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it because I looked at, it does appear that the model is a little bit high, and I looked at the sale of 269 Yonge. They sold for approximately $51,000 a unit, similar unit mix, and at $684,000, we'd be at $49,000 a unit, which I think is not only representative of the market but also representative of the performance of the property, which is a little bit lower than what the model has estimated.
Okay. Anything else before we turn you over for questioning?
No.
Okay. Mr. Story?
Thank you. Okay, page 1. Again, actual year built is 1960 and effective year built is 1960. Now,
I'm sorry, did you guys have any questions for me?
Well, this is being a question, isn't it?
my questions, right?
Oh, okay.
We are asking questions.
Okay, sorry. No, because I normally,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Very good.
Okay.
Okay, so again, the actual year built listed here is 1960 and the effective year built is 1960, which would indicate that no substantial work or no permitted work has been done since 1960 to improve this asset. Is that correct?
It would be an indication that maybe we haven't been aware of anything, or we haven't updated the property to reflect anything that would warrant an effective year change.
Okay, fair enough. Do you have any details on these sales, the subject sale history that you've included? Are they arm's length, non-arm's length? Are they share sales? Are they portfolio sales? Do we know anything about these?
No.
Okay. The vacancy rate on page 3, I'm seeing a trend here. It seems to be 2.6 for all of these. Is that just a blanket rate that we've applied to every single multi-res apartment that we're looking at today?
I'm not sure, but like in years past, there has been slight differences.
Okay. And you've said that you've admitted that the modeling doesn't necessarily capture the reality for each site-specific analysis that we do. And you've said that the EGI, I believe you said the EGI might be too high for this?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so what then becomes interesting is if the EGI is too high, then how does that affect the expense rate? And then do we then look at the cap rate? Or how do we capture that? We can't sort of change one input without affecting the others, correct?
Typically, no.
Okay, so we'd have to look at this in a more sort of detailed way. You mentioned a sale. Where was that sale? It was also on Yonge?
In reviewing the property, it's
Yeah.
not in my brief. In
Okay.
reviewing the property, it was 269, yeah.
So you're just providing that information anecdotally, that's not been entered into evidence?
Correct.
And we
Well,
know
it is
that-
evidence, it's verbal evidence.
For sure.
Sure.
But can you tell us anything else about that sale? I don't happen to know anything about it, so I'm just interested.
Besides, it's an older building, early 1900s buildings, and it had a similar suite count.
What type of sale was it? Was it arm's length, non-arm's length, portfolio sale, share sale? Any details about the transaction?
I believe it was an arm's length sale.
You believe it was,
Yeah.
okay. Arm's length or non-arm's length?
Arm's length.
Okay. Okay, and again, with the cap rate, starting to sound like a broken record here, but I have to ask again, am I correct in assuming that this table of information is all the city is willing to provide to the taxpayer in terms of demonstrating how the cap rates for the 2020 assessment cycle have been derived?
This is what we're providing, and like I said before, it is based off of income and expense information provided by property owners along with sales information.
But no information in terms of the mix of vintage, location, construction class, location, any of those pertinent
No.
details?
You-
Okay.
Mr. Story, to make it easy,
Yeah.
anything that has been brought on the previous
Fair
application,
enough.
we'll carry forward,
Okay.
because I'm sure the evidence will be the same each time.
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No,
So I'll
it's-
save everybody the trouble.
Sure. And, okay, and so you know what I'm gonna say about the inclusion of the income expense, but I think they support our position. And now, those would be my questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of the assessor, Mrs. Good?
I have no questions.
Ms. Merritt?
Just one, Mr. Chairman. The last property that we dealt with on 110 Yonge had a cap rate of 5.3, and this one is lower.
Yes.
Okay, so, and what is the reason for that? Effective age?
No, it would be the size of the building. Or. Yeah, the same. It would be the size of the building. What we've noticed, or what the modelers have noticed, is that some of the smaller buildings are trading for more compressed cap rate. And so this building is smaller than the previous building. The previous building was 17,000 square feet. This one is 8,000 square feet. And what we found is that the smaller blocks are trading for a lower cap rate. And that's why this particular property has a 5.1 and the previous larger property has a 5.3.
But it's, when you determine value, it's basically per unit, based on a square foot rate or anything like that.
I think that might I think the cap
Okay,
rate might
I can
bear,
see where you're-
it'll bear out.
I
It'll
can see
bear
where you're
out
coming from.
in the per unit.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. I thank you, Mr. Wolf. Thank you.
I do note that the previous property that Mr. Mayor referred to does have an effective age, it said 1960, and this property was in fact built in 1960.
Yeah,
The previous one was in fact built in 1914,
yeah.
and wouldn't that have an influence on the cap rate? Because it's an
No.
older, no?
No, because it's based off of the effective year built.
Okay.
So in this case, it's the same. So it's the 17,000 square feet versus the 8,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Story, you can go ahead.
Okay. much. 241 Young. So again, an effective building age of 1960, 2.5 stories, 7 bachelor suites, which is important, 6 one-bedrooms and 1 two-bedroom. The 2020 realty assessment is $845,000. I'm here today to request that value be amended based on the site-specific analysis to $406,000. Subject property is located on the east side of Yonge Street between Portage and Broadway in the West Broadway area. Again, the improvement is a 2.5-story structure built in 1960 and is presently being used as a multiple family residential building. The site size, according to the City of Winnipeg Property and Taxation Department records, is 6,000 square feet and it's zoned R2. And again, we have 14 units with 7 bachelor suites, 6 one-bedroom suites, and 1 two-unit bedroom. For the purposes of this report, we're disputing the assessor's capitalization rate of 5.1% and have instead applied a cap rate of 5.75%. This is based on our Altus 2020 cap rate study for apartments, which has been provided to the board. You'll also see that this falls on the lower end of our cap rate study for assets built between 1960 and 1974. We suggest a range of 5.75 to 6, and have applied a rate of 5.75. Now, if you follow me to our income workup, again, as we've done with all these properties, we've employed the methodology that the best way to stabilize a typical year's NOI is to take typical years over the last 3 years in scenarios where there are large expenses, we will stabilize over a longer period, and then we'll also use for example, 5% for the management fee, which is typical of the market, even though in this case that it's not, it gives us a higher value than what would be typical generally, but is in the range. Okay, so if we look at our potential gross market rents, we are at 86,510, where the city's model kicks out a number of 95,857. We will accept the 2.6% vacancy suggested by the department, bringing us to an effective gross rent of 84,260, where the city is at 93,365. When we've added our EGI, or when we've added our miscellaneous income from items such as laundry, parking, and miscellaneous, we come to an EGI, or effective gross income, of 87,699, and this is in opposition to the city's 93,365. We've stabilized our expenses, which bring us to a total expense line item on line 31 of 64,375, whereas the city is at 50,286, giving us an actual ratio of 73.4, and an NOI of 23,324, capitalized with a 5.75 cap, bringing us to an indicated market value for the 2020 assessment cycle of $406,000. And then, of course, we included the same income expense information that has been included in the city assessor's brief. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant, Mr.
So for your vacancy, you're using 2.6%?
We are accepting your 2.6%, yeah.
Why would you, I mean, you're saying that you use the actuals for site-specific valuations. Why is it not the case here?
Because it's generally about 3% or higher. So as opposed to, for any point of contention, we can live with 2.6% as opposed to 3. It seems nominal.
So market for vacancy is acceptable in this case?
We are accepting your modeled vacancy, yeah. In this scenario, yes.
So, but only a vacancy, nothing else?
That would be correct.
Okay. And in this case, you're at 73%. I thought the max was 70%.
Generally it is, yeah, no, that's true. That should be 70. Though again, the 3.4% would give rise to a nominal increase, but yes, you're correct. The top end of our scale is 70%.
That would be all my questions.
Thank you. Is this any question of the assessor? I mean, of the applicant? Mr. Merritt?
I was gonna pick up on that in regards to the 73%. Is there any reason why it's so high compared to the other one on Yonge Street, which was running at about 52%?
This is in a different block of Young, this, I mean, it's a different, now we're talking about the one at 110 Young?
110.
The 100 block versus the 200 block?
Yeah.
These are split by Broadway, these are different, they perform differently,
Okay,
suffice
very
to say.
Thank you, Mr. Story.
I have no questions, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So that takes us to 188 Colony Street.
And now if you'd like, 188 and 190 are actually twin buildings. So if you'd like to deal with them, it's all the same arguments there.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do one?
Sure.
And
then see
whatever we derive it on one, we can both agree will be the same decision the other.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay?
Okay. Oh, and I would like to suggest, there was an error in my submission where, and it does speak to the 70% maximum expense ratio. So I have,
Sorry, which submission?
this is 188
Okay.
and 190.
Yeah.
So we didn't, the ratios were over 80%. So I caught that at the last moment, and I redid the form, if I may distribute that. It's in the assessor's favor, of course, so.
Yeah, it is new evidence. Are you satisfied to have that go in at this point?
So does your figure change then?
The figure has changed, yeah, it's gone up, because it's the expense ratio
Yeah, it's better.
has been capped, yeah.
You know, I think it'll be helpful, and I think, you know, what.
You'll have both regardless to.
Yeah, I think that it's something that is obviously in the city's favor. I know it's new evidence, but I don't see any reason
It
why.
would be for your consumption.
Yeah,
Okay, fair enough.
so, yeah, this should be.
This one. And which
That's the
one?
fact it's correcting an error in your previous.
It's correcting an error that we've sort of dealt with.
It's not exactly new material.
Yeah, it's okay, so which would you like to deal with first?
Well, we'll deal, obviously, we'll deal with 188 Colonies is the.
Actually, 180 is definitely, I prefer to go with that.
Yeah,
Fair enough. Okay. Okay. So, and, oh, thank you very much.
together, it's like new money. It's like new money that's sticking together.
Actually, make these ones really good if you want, or don't just. Okay. Okay, so 188 colonies. Okay.
Okay, when you're ready, Mr. Wong.
Okay. Actually, I'd like to, I guess, make a correction as well on 188. These two properties, they are identical, 188 and 190 Colony. But when reviewing this, I noticed that the suite counts were, there was a mistake in my suite count for 188 Colony.
Okay.
And I'd like to just hand out a corrected sheet with the correct suite count.
Okay, again, I think similar to the situation you had, and we'll accept that under the same circumstances. So it's
Yeah.
it's not you, it's a correction of the evidence that's submitted.
Well, this is the correction of
Exactly.
of attributes. So there should be 4 copies of 3
Thank you. So why don't we
Okay, do you
just,
have-
why don't we just,
May I see a copy?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Well, yes,
why don't we just deal with papers that were just handed out. These are the ones that.
Well, you can
were-
slide
Yeah,
them,
we'll slide
you
them
can
into the
slide
right
them in
spot,
there,
yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
slide them in there.
Very good. I don't want to preclude any argument that the parties may have, so go ahead.
Yeah. The subject property is 188 Colony, the roll number is 120-916-01100. It's a residential apartment block that's 3 stories high. It was built in 1960 and has 20 suites with 6 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is our income valuation summary, our new page 3, We use average rents of $574 to get a potential income of $137,000. We use a 2.6% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $134,000. And we use a 58% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $56,000. Capped at 5.1%, we have an estimated market value of $1,104,000, which works out to $55,000 per unit. On page 4 are our rent comparables. It shows that the rents we've used, which are not $542 but $572, I believe. We are in line with what's on the market. On page 5 is information on how we derived our cap rates. On page 7 is a picture of the subject property. On page 9 or 8 to 14 are the income and expenses submitted by the owner. Said the operating income for the property is fairly low. I believe that the rents that we've used in our income valuation is representative of market, and on page 15, it just sort of gives you an idea that it shows that we are representative of market. The property sold on page 15 is approximately $15,000 per unit, or sorry, $50,000 per unit, and in this case, we're coming in at $55,000 per unit. I believe our income valuation is representative of a market value, and I ask that you accept the value of $1,104,000, which is on the page 3, the new page 3 that I gave you, and that is. And that value is the same as the next property, 190 Colony.
I'm sorry, again, you're suggesting that the value for each is the exact same?
For 188 and 190, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they are the same. What was causing the difference in assessed value was the incorrect suite counts,
Okay.
and so.
Okay.
Okay, that's your evidence?
Yes.
Any questions, Mr. Story?
Yes, I do. Because it is review something. Okay. Yes, okay. So, again, page 1, actual year build 1960, effective year build 1960, which would indicate that no substantial improvements have happened to this property since it was built 60 years ago, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Have you visited this property?
No.
Okay.
Well, actually, I have, but I've not fully inspected the property.
Okay, fair enough. One of the reasons I ask is on page 7, this is a marketing photo, correct?
It's if you see on the bottom, it's from
Yeah.
Towers Realty Group website.
Is this photoshopped, in your opinion? If you've seen the property and then you look at this photo, do you think this is an adequate representation of this property?
I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough. Again, my cap rate question, Is this all we're willing to present? I think the assessors made it very clear that this is all that.
Right, and, yeah, asked and answered as far as I'm concerned,
Okay,
every of the
good,
applications.
yes. Okay, and then our position clearly on the income statement is that it supports our value, because that's what we've used to derive it, and we all understand that. Now, if we go to page 15 of the assessor's brief, this is interesting. We have a sale at 168 Young, an old sale, and now it says list date 05/11/2010. Looks like it was on the market for 2 months, and it's sold for. Now here, can you explain this to me? It says list price $459,900, ORG price $549,900. What is the ORG price?
I think it might have been originally $549,000. They relisted it at $459,000 and sold for $400,000.
Do you know what the assessment was on this building at the time of sale?
No.
Okay. It's just interesting that they listed it at $549,000, but the asset realized $400,000 on the market. That would be a substantial drop in the sales price versus the original listing price, would it not be?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to point that out. And why did you use the sale that was sold? Was there nothing else that was more relevant to the reference period?
This I felt was fairly representative of the subject property.
Okay. In terms of vintage and location, or what?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. That looks about in the range, and it sold for $400,000.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the assessor, Mrs. Booth? No. Mr. Mayor?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
And I have none.
Okay. Okay, 188 Colony, again, a twin building to 190. If you look at page 1, that's a more adequate representation in my brief of what this asset actually looks like. So it's a 3-story multifamily res on 188 Colony Street, built in 1960 with no substantial improvements that adjust the effective year built. Suite mix of 1 bachelor suite and 19 one-bedrooms, somewhat atypical. The city is suggesting a value, now amended from 1,252 to 1,104,000, and we are suggesting that based on the actual performance of the asset, that an appropriate value is $406,000. Again, the subject property is located on the west side of Colony, north of Broadway and Colony intersection in the West Broadway area. We have a 3-story building, 1960, multifamily res, and the site size is 8,050 square feet. And again, 20 units, 1 bachelor suite, and 19 one-bedroom suites. No parking. Oh, sorry, 6 parking stalls. Fair enough. Okay. So, for the purpose of this exercise, we're disputing the assessor's cap rate of 5.1% and are instead applying a rate of 5.75%, which again is on the low range of the 1960 to 1974 vintage that we've developed through our cap rate study. You have a copy of the cap rate study. If I turn to that for one moment, the 188 and 190 Colony assets, we are applying a rate of 5.75 based on the most comparable cap rate in the study, which is at 210 St. Mary's and 512 Balmoral. Now, St. Mary's is extremely similar in every way, but is, I would argue, far superior based on location, and it transacted at 6.26%. 512 Balmoral is also similar, but transacted at 6.65. I would consider it superior based on its location, but only slightly, and its vintage, which is 1972. And I would carry that forward for 188 and 190 Colony. Those would be the 2 most comparable. So, with that in mind, we've used a 5.75% cap rate. And if you follow me over to my income stabilization sheet, you'll see that the city is suggesting that the potential market gross rents, now I suppose this is all cheap, so I won't compare and contrast with the city, but I will say that the actual potential market gross rents are $111,978. Again, we've accepted the assessor's stabilized vacancy of 2.6%. Trying to see if there's anything atypical here. I think this is effectively, so for example, there's a good example in the insurance. There was something that happened in 2016 which spiked the insurance, but in order to stabilize it, instead of taking the average of just north of 4,000, we took the typical year, 2,945, which is in line 14. So all of the same methodology that we've been talking about all morning. And this is where we found that the actual expense ratio is 80.3%, but I've corrected that to cap it at 70%, giving us, where the actual NOI is 23,000, but based on stabilizing the ratio gives us 35,610, bringing us to a indicated market value of $594,000. Right. So that's changed from my initial brief based on this new workup. So we're asking for $594,000. And we could, it would be, I believe, let me just double check now. We would be happy to apply that to both assets, if that's how we place.
And that's how we're handling this, that's
Fair
fair
enough,
enough.
yep.
Questions, Mr. Wong?
I guess your new ask is $593,000. That works out to approximately $29,000 per unit. Like in my experience, that seems a little bit low. Did you do anything to sort of verify whether your values are representative of market?
This is the economic reality of this asset. So we're not using, again, we're not trying to put this property into the model. We are looking at this on a site-specific basis, which is the point of this whole exercise is to analyze each one of these assets on a specific basis, and this is the economic reality of this asset, as supported by the income and expense that you've included in your brief. This is the reality of these two properties.
So you haven't done anything to verify the value?
What do you mean by verify the value?
Just to sort of validate that your value is reasonable?
Well, I've analyzed the income and expense ratio. I've analyzed the financials of the owner, and that's if a prudent, non-motivated buyer were to look at this asset, they would request this information, and they would come to a value that is much closer to mine than yours, for all due respect.
Are you aware that there was an agreement to this value for 2014 that was maybe a lot higher than what you're asking?
That wasn't me, and my understanding is
Yeah.
that we don't bring up agreements that we make outside of here, and that wasn't me who did that. So I actually don't know anything about it, to be quite honest with you. I don't know about anything in terms of the agreement, if that does exist indeed.
Is that true? We don't, there's no discussion about certificates of agreements? I'm not sure.
No, of course not.
It's not here in evidence, so,
No.
we don't. We'll evaluate this on the basis of the presentations that you both make, and
Okay, but typically our certificates of agreement,
if you had an agreement, Mr. Wong, you wouldn't have to be here today.
Yeah, well, if they're historical.
yeah.
No, but I'm saying if you had an agreement, you wouldn't have to be here today.
Oh, yeah,
You know,
yeah. No,
so-
I'm just talking about in general,
Yeah.
in terms of historical certificates of agreements.
What does that have to do with analyzing an asset and the approach to value? That's immaterial.
Okay.
Just because you agreed to a value with somebody else from our firm at some point in the past, that doesn't have anything to do with the exercise. that we're
I'm just trying to make sure I know what is sort of allowed.
That's fine,
and-
I'm letting you ask the question.
Yeah, so, okay, sorry, I guess for me, like, if I wanted to sort of verify whether certain values were reasonable or not, I, maybe look to the market to see
You
if.
can ask
that-
a question right now, though. If you
Yeah.
want to make a summation, I'll let you do so after. Or this
That
is,
that
is a question?
That is all my questions.
Okay, or can that be a question? You can, that Mr. stories say why he,
I guess so. I guess I could go along that line
Yeah.
where I might like I guess I did for this example where I provided a comparable, which kind of supports maybe how we've done
is
it.
that a question?
Have you done something similar?
Have I looked at a sale from 2010?
Yeah.
And no, I've not. That's not what we're doing. We're not doing
Okay.
the comparable sales approach. We're looking at the income approach.
Okay, you've answered the question. Any questions of the applicant, Ms. Nisbet?
No, I don't.
Just one question.
Yeah, sure.
There's a discrepancy of about $26,000 between your gross and the city's gross. So, who is correct?
Well, I mean, the city's using modeling, right? We are using site-specific analysis. So the city has a very difficult job in terms of how they have to assign a value to a number of roles in the city, and they clearly don't have the time to go in and do a handmade assessment on every single property, but fortunately for our clients, we do. So, and this is particularly, these are the types of properties that are failed, in my opinion, that I've seen that are failed most by the modeling, because it's not, the numbers that are committed are not representative of the actual economic reality. That's, and we can see that based on the financials.
Just one other question, Mr. Story. You're using for Colony, you're
Mhm.
using 6%.
Correct, yeah.
On Young Street, you used 5 3/4.
Correct.
So do you find, what you're basically saying is that it's inferior?
Yeah,
Colony.
what I'm saying is that a big part of the cap rate is how a prudent purchaser would build risk into their decision. Risk, potential durability of the income stream. When we look at the financials, I think that what you're saying is appropriate. I think that yes, that there are higher cap rates for different assets based on how they perform and how we can see how the market has treated certain assets in the past based on our cap rate study, and how the market would bake risk into their decisions to purchase or not.
So you can justify the 6% instead of the 7 3/4?
5 3/4.
5 3/4, I'm sorry.
7 3/4 would be very
Okay,
high,
right,
yeah.
right.
Yes, no, absolutely, yes, I think that's very consistent. Yeah.
Okay, I thank you, Mr. Story.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Story, my first question is, you indicated to the assessor, that you thought page 7 of his material showed a photoshopped,
Well, I've been to this
Yeah.
property a number of times, and this is not what it looks like.
okay, and are you acknowledging, do you agree that it came off of the management's website?
It's a marketing photo, which
It's a
is.
marketing photo, so it's trying to attract tenants to the property,
Yeah, it's a.
making it look like it might be better than it actually
It's a
is.
glamour shot.
You know, to try to get people to come and
Yeah.
live there, right?
Yes.
And the
Thank you for your photo.
material that you filed,
Mhm.
I'm talking about the expense ratios, you didn't yourself have them audited, did you?
Have them audited
Audited
by,
by an auditor to make sure that
No,
they're not audited, so they're before us. They're not sworn evidence either, but they paint a picture, and they paint a picture of a property that is not performing very well. So it's a picture that is basically like another picture that is not a true picture. So how do we know?
I don't know about that.
How do we know that they're more honest in the material that they're providing
Oh,
to us?
I would say.
And the picture they're putting on the website, they try to attract the attention of potential tenants.
Well, I think that all, when we're marketing homes for sale, for example, or
Yeah.
apartments, it's in our interest.
You're not answering my
as
question.
vendors- Well, I'm getting to
Okay.
it. It is in our interest to, provide
Okay,
photos that are altered and more beautiful or whatever. Now, how that relates to the income statements,
Yeah.
I'm not making that leap with it.
okay.
I
Well,
believe these income statements to be true.
Okay.
I believe them to be true.
But in fact, though, if they were relied upon by the city to evaluate the property, paint a better picture for the
Oh,
owner,
if-
as opposed to getting
if
a
the
lower,
city-
a lower evaluation on the property.
You would come to a more true value if the city had the opportunity to assess
Right.
every single site on a site
Based
specific
on what the-
basis.
what
But
the-
unfortunately,
yeah.
the task is
No,
monumental.
based on the picture that the owner himself provides by the renders that are sent in.
Sure, right.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, And
That's it.
we'll do the same.
The 190 Colony, they're pretty much identical.
Yeah, we
They're
both agree that
identical, yeah.
whatever valuation we come
Okay.
to with this
Yeah.
property, we'll do with the
Or
other.
like basically use the same approach.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Wonderful, well, thank you so much.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yes, yes, let me just make a note of what I did here.
Is our hearing closed now?
Yes.
We're done? Our
We
hearing
are.
is closed?
Yeah, we,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
oh, sorry. Thank you.